Well, hey there, I'm Alvalyn Lundgren, and in this sketchbook session, I'll be talking about primary forms, specifically prisms and cylinders. So in a previous video, I had talked about the cone, the sphere, and the cube as the basic building blocks for everything you draw. And the understanding that everything can be made up of the cone, the sphere, and the cylinder in various combinations. So I wanted to talk in this one about prisms and cylinders, which are kind of the next level up in terms of primary forms. And again, pretty much anything is a prism or a cylinder. So an understanding of the various types of forms that we deal with gives us the ability to communicate visually. So just a preface, we deal when we draw, when we're designing, when we're taking photographs, we're dealing with what's known as a form language. So language, of course, is to communicate. Form is how something looks. It's the visual appearance. So various forms, of course, the sphere, the circle into a sphere, the square into a cube, and the triangle into the pyramid. These are the basic geometric forms, and as I said in the previous video, everything can be broken down into and abstracted into these three forms. So prisms and cylinders are a separate but very related category. So prisms have edges and faces. Cylinders will have a top and a bottom edge. They will have parallel sides, but they are seen as, they will have a curved wall or a curved face. So prisms have edges and flat faces. So by drawing with these basic forms, you get a big picture view. And that helps you keep things very simple, first of all, and it helps you go from the large idea to the smaller details rather than starting out with the details. If you start out with the details, you're going to lose proportion, you're going to lose scale, you're going to lose shape. You're going to end up with something that doesn't look right. You're not going to be able to produce the kind of volume that you want to be able to produce in the illusion of your drawing. In other words, things are going to look out of whack. And you're going to sit there and think, what the heck did I just do? So we want to avoid the what the heck questions. So the reason we do this is we are translating three-dimensional understanding into a two-dimensional space. So we're losing a whole dimension, but we still have to create that illusion. Now notice I'm being very sketchy here, and this is good. I'm not just drawing a single ellipse for the top or the bottom of the cylinder. I'm redrawing And getting that motion is really helpful. Getting that motion loosens you up, and you don't focus on the edge detail, you focus on the overall shape, the overall form that you're trying to get. And then you can deal with the details. Also, laying in the gestures in this way, the just going back and forth over things, actually helps you set up accuracy in terms of rate of curve. A lot of people will draw a cylinder like this, and they'll create this kind of leaf or almond shape. And there are no sharp corners in a cylinder. We don't want to do that. So by doing this, you are eliminating the corner idea, and you're going to have a far more accurate idea, far more accurate drawing that depicts a form as it truly is. So what I'm doing here also is, it's called drawing through. And this is a technique where you're actually regarding the form or drawing the form as if it's transparent, and you see the other side. And if you develop the drawing, you'll eventually get rid of the backside lines and show only what's visible from the single point of view that you're seeing something from. But drawing through helps you establish the volume of the form, that illusion that you're trying to get. So you can see these are really sketchy, and that's all you need. If you are learning to draw, you don't have to be perfect. You're learning about movement, you're learning about gesture, you're learning about building form, you're learning about structure. So don't worry about being accurate. Worry about how you're seeing and how you're translating what you're seeing onto a two-dimensional surface. So this repetition of movement is going to end up looking really sketchy, but that's good for you. And these are techniques and approaches that artists and illustrators have used for centuries, and they use worldwide. These are basic drawing approaches and methods that result in accuracy and the ability to communicate. Animators do this, game developers do this. This is a very common approach to drawing, so don't set it aside and try to just go for the details. Start large, start simple, then work into the details. So a prism, again, has faces, or it's flat. So it has surfaces that are flat, which means that as the form becomes volumetric, there are edges. So if I start out by drawing, let's just say I'm going to draw a box in 1-point perspective here. So there's the front of the box, and this is representing a flat face. So if I want to draw the side, I'm going to add another shape. So this is one shape, this is another shape, and I'm just going to gesture this in. And then I have to draw the top, because I only see 3 sides, and you only see 3 sides of that box at one time. You have to actually turn the form in order to be able to see the other side, or you need to walk around it. I remember when I was taking drawing in school, very often my instructors would have us get up and actually walk around the figure or walk around the still life setup so that we could understand what was going on the back side, on the part that we could not see. And it was really helpful. So think about that as you draw, because you can't see everything all at once. 3-dimensionally, you only see parts of forms. So there's a box in space, and if I want to make it a empty box, I will do that. So this is a prism. It has hard edges. It has faces which are flat, and then edges and corners, corner points. And then I can start giving it some volumetric illusion by just developing some shading as if the light's coming from this side. And then that also means that I'm going to need to give it a shadow. To accurately give it a shadow, I'm going to need to draw through and understand where this back corner is that I can't see, because the form itself is going to block the light source to create the shadow. So we have to draw the shadow as if it's coming from that back corner, maybe coming from here. So there's the cast shadow onto the surface. And then we can just, in detail, we can add some dimension to the edge. And this is where we get a little bit more noodly. And we'll put it on a tabletop. So when you're drawing prisms and cylinders, it's pretty easy with a prism to create something that communicates dimensionality right away. Because you have the edges. So you are already defining a front face, a side face, an inside back face, and an inside side face. Or if this is solid, then it's a top face. Again, 1, 2, 3 faces. And you don't need much more than that to get the initial communication going. When you're dealing with a cylinder, however, that's a whole different ballgame. First I'll bring a gestural line down here. It gives me a point for accuracy. With a cylinder, I don't have any faces, so I have to do more with the cylinder in terms of shading to communicate what it actually is. So again, if we're having, say, a light source coming from this side on both of these, with the prism, I would just shade everything where the light doesn't hit. And I would get a fairly acceptable rate of volumetric illusion. With the cylinder, I actually need to shade. I actually need to take this front surface and give it some light and shadow delineation. We don't see form, by the way, without the interplay of light and shadow. We need the light and the dark to understand form, to be able to even perceive form. We don't see anything without light. You turn out all the lights, you're going to have a hard time seeing things. I'll look that up for you there. So light and shadow help us understand form. So you will depict light and shadow in your drawings. Line drawings are fine. Again, with cylinders, it gets a little more difficult to communicate what the form actually is unless you add a few more lines or you start shading. So what you can do is put some lines going on in the center of the form, kind of in the core areas. So that if I'm drawing a cylinder, start kind of playing out the edge here. Putting some cross-contour lines in the middle of the form, in the core area of the form, is going to help present the understanding that this is indeed a cylinder. This is round, and it has a kind of a flat top, and it has a flat bottom, but it's round all the way through. So cross-contour are lines that go across the form or around the form on the short end, in this case. So, in other words, if I'm, a lot of food cans are kind of ribbed right in here. So if I start creating some additional ribs, that repetition of line helps emphasize the fact that this is a cylinder. And again, no sharp edges or no corners on cylinders. So everything comes in and rounds off on a cylinder. This comes up and immediately goes into the curve on the back side and also on the front side. That's why gesturing in is going to help you communicate that. So again, we designated a light source here, so that would mean that the shadow's sort of on this side. So let's do this. Just make kind of give it a rim light maybe. Let's make this in shadow and this part in shadow. And just kind of laying this in loosely. Everything here is loose, nothing is real tight, not a lot of detail. Don't worry about the details. And then what I'm going to do is create a darker area in here. Because shadows are not all one color. We've got light reflected from the surface over here back into the shadow to lighten it up. So this is called a core shadow, and it'll be the darkest part of the shadow. But because there's no sharp edges, you can't just do a flat change of color or an abrupt change of color along a very well-defined edge like you can here. You kind of have to play up the slow movement of light into the shadow area where the light doesn't hit, because the form is actually turning away from the light. So now we're starting to get a sense of volume. This is a closed. We'll give it a top. The top will be in light. And we'll designate using straight lines going across that the top is closed and it's also flat. Wearing my pencil down. By the way, I'm using a Derwent Inktense. And earlier I was using a Prismacolor Premier Black. So these are colored pencils, not graphite pencils. These are, there's wax in all pencils, wax and graphite in a regular drawing pencil, like this one. Graphite has a different quality. Colored pencils have a lot more wax, and they don't have any lead, they don't have any graphite, they have other pigmentation, they have other pigments and colorants in them, and they have a different characteristic. So this is the graphite pencil, and this is the colored pencil. And the little texture in there is because of the paper. So the kind of paper you use is going to affect the appearance of the line and the shading. So this is about as dark as I'm going to be able to get with the graphite pencil. With the colored pencil, I can get a lot darker and just go denser. So I could do this. Notice I'm not doing this, I'm going around the form. For some reason, that just helps flesh it out more. And then, of course, I can come back here and detail, and get more involved and more detailed and noodly, what I call it, in defining those ridges. So remember, your goal with drawing from life, drawing from photographic reference, is to achieve a three-dimensional appearance in a two-dimensional space. So let's talk about edges. With a prism, your edges are going to be sharp, very well defined. So here I have sort of a wedge-shaped prismatic form. So we see it has this side, and then the back side that we can't see. If I'm going to actually draw that through, I'm basically going to have it look like that. There are forms that you will draw which are sort of a transition between the sharp edge and having no edges whatsoever. So if we were to draw that in more of a, give it some rounder edge, you're still going to want to designate, the softness of the edge. You're still going to want to show the faces, but the faces won't be really sharp. And then the cylinder, as I've already drawn, I always usually on a cylinder to line up the ellipses properly, I usually do an action line or a gesture line straight down the middle and then drop implied lines down, and that way I know where to end the ellipse and how to center it. So I can draw straight lines and the thing doesn't look like it's going that way or that way. Okay. So here, obviously, you're going to have a sharp delineation, a very clear, high contrast delineation between the light side and the dark side. So you want to keep your edges really clean to communicate that well. Keep your edge as precise as possible. And practice drawing straight lines, by the way. You don't need a ruler to draw a fairly straight line. Just practice it, and you'll eventually get it. By the way, the quicker, just shove this up here, the more quickly you make a line, the straighter you're going to do it. If you're going slowly, you're going to get more wobbly, and a lot of people sketch like this, and that does not give you a straight line if you're constantly sketching over your lines. So don't do that, just make a line. And if you go from the elbow and not your wrist, you'll also have better success at making straight lines. So you kind of lock your wrist and your lines will go straighter. If you're doing this, there's going to be an arc, or it's going to wobble more. So draw from the shoulder and the forearm rather than the wrist when you are drawing what I call globally or simple. So with a curved edge, but there are faces, that edge is not going to be as sharp. It's going to be fairly soft. So say the edge is actually coming in here, and this is not closest to the viewer. I don't know what kind of form this is, but maybe it's a bone or something like that. There's going to be a delineation between the planes, but it's not going to be a really sharp edge. So it's going to be a lot softer. So a lot of what you communicate is how you deal with the edges that you're drawing. So if this surface is flat, this is going to be a fairly sharp edge. But this edge, the leading edge, the one that's closest to you as the artist or the viewer, will be fairly soft. But there will still be a turning of the form. If the light's coming here, this is the light side, this will all be in shadow. So how you deal with your edges is going to help you communicate what you're seeing. So with the cylinder, as I've already done, you don't have any edges on that vertical wall. In this case, it's a vertical wall because not all cylinders are vertical. And so again, light source here, and we're going to put this here, and this is where we're going to actually start the shadow, and we're going to start the shadow very lightly. And then we're going to create the core right in here. And start building out that core area. Without a core shadow, the cylinder can appear very flat. So you want to look for the areas where the shadow is darkest and start giving them some emphasis. And again, just detail coming down, and it drops straight down and then immediately into the curve so that there is, again, no corner. You don't want any sharp, pointy things going on in your cylinders. One of the best things that I enjoy about drawing, or one of the best things about it, in my opinion, is just the ability to move in different ways. So you come in hard and then you lift and you go out swiftly. So you're making a line that comes in hard and then you can move off. And it's in your movements of your hands, your arm, movement from your shoulder. There's a lot of things you can do with line and shading. I just really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun to see the various types of movements and understand the various ways you manipulate the medium, the pencil, the tools. Just throw a little handle on it here like this. Make it into something. So to summarize, with prisms and cylinders, prisms have faces, flat faces, which means they have edges. Cylinders have curved walls. You want to start simply, build detail. Start with a gestural or an action line. Especially with cylinders, so that you can position the top in relationship to the bottom, and so that things line up properly. You want to repeat your movements in order to be able to flesh out the form. So you're doing this kind of over and over and over again. That keeps you loose and it forces you to start simply. Draw through. So you're drawing the object as if it's transparent. So you understand the back side and the front side and all 6 sides of the form. And that helps you communicate volume. And understand that this is an approach to drawing. You start simple and you end with the detail. So this is all about primary forms And primary means they're what you start with. They're the initial things. They're the basic things.